Hello, and thank you very much for joining me today. My name is Marva Ward. I'm the National Product Educator for the Now brand of supplements in Canada, and I'm conducting these brief discussions specific to health-related issues, coupled with a discussion also on evidence-based therapies that are being used within the naturopathic community, specific to the use of nutrition and supplements, used as preventatives, but even as options or catalysts in reversing these diseased states. So today I'm going to be speaking about digestive homeostasis, how we get back to that state by repairing leaky gut or leaky gut syndrome. Digestion and elimination organs on this slide, cartoonish type pictorial of our digestive organs, the liver, the stomach, the colon, the ascending colon, the descending colon, the small intestine. And where we're really going to focus on today, of course, is the stomach, the small intestine, and the liver, which is also very much included. Digestive process is very complex, but I'm going to really simplify it here on this slide. Digestion begins in the mouth with the release of an enzyme called ptyalin. Ptyalin is a form of amylase, which ultimately helps to start to break down starch. In the stomach, pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid are released. They're primarily released to break down protein, particularly hydrochloric acid, and to pull B12 from the protein. Within the stomach walls as well, the intrinsic factor, which is a protein, is also released, and it binds with the B12 that we've pulled from our protein and then sends it off into the small intestine. Now, this is where really the digestive process starts to break down, because for most individuals, hydrochloric acid is problematic. We don't have enough of it. However, in a perfect world, once we have digested our food and the food in the stomach is turned to chyme, it then is sent through the duodenum, which is the first part of the initial part of the small intestine. In this stage, the pH of the chyme must be raised, and so ultimately bicarbonate is produced and released onto the chyme, as well as bile. Bile is to help emulsify fats, and then pancreatic enzymes as well to break down all of the nutrients even further. In the jejunum, this is really the main section of our small intestine where nutrients are broken down and ultimately absorbed. It's the second section of the small intestine, and because it plays such a crucial role in absorption, microvilli, they're almost like protruding fingers from the wall of the jejunum, help to expand the surface of our small intestine in this particular area. However, it is in the jejunum where it is problematic in leaky gut, also celiac disease, where the microvilli are crushed and destroyed, and ultimately the act of absorption is very much compromised. In the ileum, this is where, if we have been able to pull B12 from our stomach when we are initially digesting our food in the stomach, this is where B12 is absorbed in the ileum. This is the third stage. Some of the enzymes that are released are gastrin, protease, etc. It's the final stage of protein and carbohydrate digestion. The ileum is also where our Peyer's patches are. It is the key to our immunity within the gut. The Peyer's patches are lymph tissue, which create a number of white blood cells, and again it is very proactive in the manipulation, or I would say certainly the key to our immune system when we're speaking about it being in the gut. The large intestine is the last part of digestion. It's where we are eliminating all of the fiber, etc., that we haven't used, and where we absorb a lot of water and utilize a lot of water, and the fiber is then and the cellulose from our food, etc., is then released. Digestive breakdown. I spoke about hydrochloric acid being released in the stomach, and that this is where we're breaking down protein to be able to utilize, certainly to utilize B12 to pull it from our our protein, but also intrinsic factor is profoundly important. They say that there's a correlation between low hydrochloric acid and low intrinsic factor. If you have low hydrochloric acid, you can't pull B12 from your protein. It's not released. If you have low hydrochloric acid and you're not releasing B12, intrinsic factor is often compromised as well. If we've certainly heard about pernicious anemia, and that type of anemia is directly related to intrinsic factor and the body's ability to bind to B12. So low hydrochloric acid is going to affect our iron deficiency, specific for B12 deficiency and pernicious anemia. Heartburn, we often associate heartburn with high hydrochloric acid, and certainly the allopathic community looks at it with that set of eyes. But in our naturopathic community, we typically look at heartburn, gas, and bloating it as definite symptoms of low hydrochloric acid. So we can see how problematic this can be if you go to the doctor and you then get acid reducing pharmaceuticals that will stop any type of release or creation of hydrochloric acid. We start to see a domino effect of problematic issues because we're lowering hydrochloric acid even more. Hydrochloric acid is also our first line of defense from things that we ingest, specifically parasites, bacteria, viruses, etc. If our hydrochloric acid is at the level with which it should be, we're typically going to destroy anything that we're taking in through our mouth and into our stomach. But once again, it is a North American deficiency in hydrochloric acid, and ultimately we're seeing high levels of candida, parasites, even related to constipation or diarrhea. Inflammation becomes a profound issue in this particular case, because if you have low hydrochloric acid, you're ultimately allowing for larger macronutrients to enter into the small intestine that ultimately would not in any other in a perfect world. So ultimately this creates bacterial dysbiosis, a real imbalance in good and bad bacteria. Intestinal permeability, where larger macronutrients are now entering into the bloodstream that typically wouldn't be there, but they're not being digested properly. And ultimately, if the digestion process is profoundly compromised because of low hydrochloric acid and ultimately inflammation, we're going to see a huge problem with malabsorption of nutrients. We will not be absorbing nutrients because we're not breaking them down. And this ultimately leads to leaky gut syndrome and the issues that are accompanied with this syndrome. So leaky gut syndrome is best described as increased permeability of the intestinal mucosa. This is caused from low hydrochloric acid, inflammatory factors in the gut, and ultimately immune issues as well. Immune-related issues, which I'll speak more about as we carry on. So increased absorption of intestinal-derived endotoxins, antigens, inflammatory mediators, and intact bacteria. Partially digested macronutrients in the form of proteins, carbohydrates, and fats are then released into the bloodstream, and this is really where the onset of disease is said to begin. These particular agents can cause local and systemic reactions that are associated with a broad range of acute and chronic diseases. Deteriorating changes within the mucosal epithelial can lead to decreased permeability and malabsorption of essential nutrients, which I touched on earlier, and the increased permeability and absorption of pathogenic macromolecules. Antibodies are created due to these foreign agents. So things that typically macronutrients that are entering into the bloodstream are foreign bodies to our immune system. They're marked for destruction, and the immune system attacks. And at times organs and tissues are accidentally marked as well for a number of different reasons. First of all, if you're starting with profound inflammation to rid the body of this foreign what the body perceives as a foreign attack, then organs and tissues can accidentally be marked simply because these foreign agents can lodge into joints and into muscle tissue. However, there's something called molecular mimicry. It's a case of mistaken identity, that an antigen, a marked antigen or pathogen, or foreign macronutrient is marked. It may have a similar amino acid sequence to tissues in the body, and so the body becomes confused and looks now at our tissue as possibly being that foreign macronutrient as well. That's another way with which it can help to start to destroy the body or tissue. There's evidence that suggests that the pathogenesis of all autoimmune diseases would not exist without the presence of leaky gut. And I've given you a URL for a PubMed article on that as well. Protein cross-reactivity really complicates matters, and this is something that we see specific if we think about celiac disease, and that's the example that I've given you here. Cross-reactivity, there's numerous antigen bodies that bind to one antibody. So when the body sees a foreign pathogen, particularly if we're thinking about food, you're looking, and if we think about autoimmune disease, it's typically a IgA antibody that that attaches to an antigen. For example, in this case, the reactive is the gliadin antibody that is binding to the gliadin antigen. The complete binding of the antigen to the antibody, this is the reactive immune response. But there's also cross-reactivity. Particularly, we see this a lot with gliadin antigens and casein antigens. As you can see, they're very similar. They're missing simply one peak. And so this partial binding will permit the body's reaction to casein as well, when typically it's gliadin that the body is reacting to. You'll see non-reactive antigens with a rice antigen and a gliadin antibody. There's insufficient binding, and so often you're not getting that same autoimmune or immune response. If we take a look at a list of what is suspected to be diseases that are associated with increased intestinal permeability, any autoimmune disease, any inflammatory disease, absolutely leaky gut is absolutely a factor. And I don't think it comes as much as a surprise. But what I do believe, where I found was interesting, was that there's a lot of research being done. It has been done, and currently is being accepted as a very valid hypothesis that the progression of HIV to AIDS is often intestinal permeability is often the catalyst. A number of different reasons having to do with cell signaling. Proteins that are involved in systemic inflammation, and people with leaky gut, this is precisely what happens. The reaction to foods in the form of excessive antibodies such as IgA antibodies. And it is said that the relationship between HIV and the health of the gastrointestinal tract is profoundly important to look at, what's specific to the progression to full-blown AIDS. What exactly causes the digestive breakdown? Antibiotics Absolutely. Antibiotics creates an environment of dysbiosis where we have a profound imbalance of bad bacteria versus good bacteria. Antacids and proton pump inhibitors. I spoke about the symptoms when we think about heartburn and how the allopathic community gives us proton pump inhibitors. These are pharmaceuticals that stop the release of hydrochloric acid or even the production of it. And we also talked about heartburn being a symptom of too little hydrochloric acid because most people experience heartburn 2 to 3 hours after they've eaten. In a perfect world, if we have the proper amount of hydrochloric acid, food should be leaving the stomach within about 45 minutes after eating. When heartburn occurs 2 to 3 hours after we've eaten, it's simply because the food is still sitting in the stomach, and it is creating a lot of putrefaction, and where we start to have a regurgitation in the form of acid reflux, and ultimately the little bit of acid that might be in the stomach starts to burn our esophagus. Ultimately, it would, even in small amounts. But a lot of the problem is the putrefaction of the food and not necessarily the hydrochloric acid. So ultimately, when we're given proton pump inhibitors and antacid, this is causing more problematic issues as far as larger macronutrients being allowed to pass into the small intestine. I spoke a little bit about delayed gastric emptying. This is precisely what I'm speaking about, specific to low hydrochloric acid. NSAIDs, or their non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs in the form of aspirin and everything that we can get over the counter, but also that we can get through pharmaceuticals. And as an inflammatory society, everyone is on anti-inflammatories to one degree or another. The standard North American diet, simply our food combining proteins with carbohydrates. It's said to be problematic for digestion. And proteins with fruit. Eating fruit with everything when a lot of research suggests it should be eaten on its own. Caffeine and alcohol immediately will create intestinal permeability simply through the caffeine and the alcohol. And think about how individuals love to have their little danishes with their coffee in the morning or their tea, and ultimately having a glass of wine with your food. Again, this can create a digestive breakdown and intestinal permeability, and it may just be temporary at this time, but it certainly does create it. And of course, intestinal infections and viruses and bacteria. The most popular way to test for intestinal permeability is called the lactose mannitol challenge. It's an assessment where you directly measure the ability of these two non-metabolized sugar molecules to permeate the intestinal mucosa. You drink pre-measured amounts of both lactulose and mannitol. The degree of intestinal permeability or malabsorption is reflected in the levels of the two sugars that are recovered in a urine sample. This is typically about 6 hours after you have ingested it. So increased lactulose excretion is hyperpermeability. And if you have decreased mannitol excretion, this is specific to malabsorption. So how do we fix leaky gut syndrome? The 4 R's, it's a gastrointestinal support program, has been used for about 20 years, to my recollection anyway, and it has been profoundly effective in recovering from leaky gut syndrome and repairing the gut. And there are 4 procedures with which one would take and steps with which you would take. And that's what I'm going to explain today as far as the 4 R's. So the solution is the 4 R's, and it's a program that provides a return to digestive homeostasis, rebuilding the intestinal mucosa, regulating bacterial dysbiosis, improving good bacteria over bad bacteria, and actually repairing the gut as well. So we remove, replace, re-inoculate, and repair through specific proven nutrients. So remove, what are you doing? You're eliminating pathogens and bad microflora or very bad bacteria, basically, and parasites. This is something that's done. You certainly aren't going to do a parasite cleanse before you do a gastrointestinal gastrointestinal 4Rs, because what you're going to find is this whole solution for repairing the gut is also going to, in and of itself, help with the destruction of bad bacteria as well as parasites. If you really want a fantastic and fantastic test that measures pathogens, microflora issues, and parasite issues, there's comprehensive stool testing that your naturopathic doctor can do for you that is very, very comprehensive and will show, as I say, pathogens, the balance of good and bad bacteria and parasites, but it will also speak to malabsorption issues as well. It's very extensive, comprehensive stool testing. It also, you're removing the common food allergens: dairy, gluten-containing grains, eggs, soy, refined sugar of all kinds, and processed foods. We're going to talk a lot about that today as well. If we think about replace, this is the second solution. We're replacing digestive factors that we're not secreting. This can be everything from enzymes to inadequate amounts of enzymes, or hydrochloric acid for that matter, plant enzymes, pancreatic enzymes, hydrochloric acid, bile, even reintroducing proper solutions for bile, which is typically excreted from the gallbladder. It helps with the emulsification of fats, supports the gallbladder, and ultimately supports liver as well. When we think about replacing, we think about hydrochloric acid, bile, all of the different enzymes. The perfect place to start is in a full spectrum enzyme supplement like our plant enzymes. This has a full array of different enzymes to help with protein breakdown, starch, dairy, although dairy isn't something you would be eating in this particular, trying to recover from this particular issue, and I'll speak more about that in a moment. But even cellulase is in here to help with fiber breakdown of food. Bromelain is a perfect addition because it is something that helps to break down protein even further, and it's sourced from pineapple. Our chewable papaya enzyme is an excellent option as well. Again, a full spectrum of enzymatic activity: protease, lipase, cellulase, bromelain, and papain, all of which help to break down fats, carbohydrates, and proteins without the addition of hydrochloric acid. Now, of course, our super enzymes are considered really to be the pinnacle of all enzymes, simply because they are a full spectrum of plant and pancreatic enzymes, but they also include hydrochloric acid as well as bile. And they come in capsule and tablet. Now, the great thing about these particular enzymes is that they don't contain a huge amount of hydrochloric acid. It's simply about 200 milligrams. But for some individuals, that is too much. And I mentioned that earlier, that I think in the previous slide, that if individuals have profound issues with burning in the stomach and etc., although we know hydrochloric acid might be the perfect solution for them, start off simply with full spectrum enzymes before adding hydrochloric acid to get their digestion on the right track. As I said, you can always start with one super enzyme simply because it only has 200 milligrams of hydrochloric acid. We have hydrochloric acid in the form of betaine that has 600 milligrams in one capsule. So this certainly gives you an idea that it is a moderate amount of hydrochloric acid and might be the perfect solution. Having the ox bile, again, is for individuals who do not have a gallbladder. These particular enzymes are the perfect solution. Reinoculate. This is setting the stage with prebiotics like FOS, inulin, and fiber, reintroducing good bacteria in the form of probiotics, lactobacillus, and just giving you different acidophilus forms that one might introduce, and also bifidobacterium as well. And when you're reinoculating, you're trying to give them the most amount of strains with the highest amount of probiotic cells within the capsule. And so for the Now brand, we have a 25 billion and a 50 billion with a probiotic form of 10 strains. Saccharomyces boulardii is also something you might want to consider, and I'll speak more about that in a moment. With our Now probiotic 10 strain, 25 and 50 billion, this is a vegetarian form of probiotic. It's dairy-free, non-GMO, and it is a fantastic acid-resistant probiotic. So this can be taken with food or without food, but it must be refrigerated, as most probiotics do need to be refrigerated. So on slides number 20 and 21, I've given you an example of all of the strains: Lactobacillus acidophilus, Plantarum, Silvarius, Casei, Paracasei, and Rhamnosus, and also Bifidobacterium, Bifidum, Brev, Longium, and Streptococcus thermophilus. What I've done as well is showing you in the 25 billion the bacterial count, in the 50 billion the bacterial count as well, and the predominant function of each of these particular strains. Lactobacillus rhamnosus inhibits pathogenic bacteria and viruses. This is a probiotic that contains the prebiotic fructooligosaccharides, and prebiotics allow to set the stage in the gut for the reproduction of the probiotic, just like fiber will do the same thing. The probiotic 10 is GMO free, and it is dairy free as well. Saccharomyces boulardii, when we're looking at the lower intestine, is one of the most fantastic supportives that you could offer in this particular issue, just to give lower intestinal support. The three main effects of the digestive tract is the luminal action, the direct antimicrobial effect, the interaction with pathogens and their toxins. I spoke earlier about not worrying so much when you start this program to eliminate the body of pathogens, or and to eliminate the body of parasites, because there's certain things that you can do, the good bacteria, the fiber, and the diet, which will all help to eliminate to some degree. Once the gut's healed, then you can directly look at the possibility of removing parasites if that is an issue. So the luminal action helps to interact with pathogens and their toxins in the bowel. It increases short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids are intestinal fuel, and they have a huge capacity for healing bowel tissue. When we're sick or ill, or our digestive tract is not functioning properly, we have a real problem with the short-chain fatty acid production. And so a bottle or two of Saccharomyces boulardii initially is going to help with repairing of the bowel as well. And it's a mucosal anti-inflammatory. It increases antibodies and reduces inflammation. Repair is the final stage, and this is where we've seen historically that these are proven. This is a proven method in repairing. You regenerate, you heal the gastrointestinal mucosal lining, and it is direct nutritional supplementation that is critical in repairing the intestinal mucosa. So the daily nutrients that are required, I've broken this down into critical healing nutrients. This is these are proven nutrients that have been used for decades specifically to heal the gut. And the vitamins are vitamin C, vitamin E, and vitamin A, all of which heal tissue. Minerals, zinc, and manganese, again, absolutely healing for the healing aspect. I have put probiotics here, typically just as a reminder that probiotics are absolutely imperative. The adjunct therapy, I know that initially with the leaky gut protocol, it was simply the critical healing nutrients that I've given you as far as vitamin C, vitamin E, etc. However, lately I've seen also other additions, and I think they're worthy of talking about, like L-glutamine. But you don't need a lot of L-glutamine. Some people have an intolerance to it, so L-glutamine simply at 4,000 to 6,000 milligrams a day would be extremely effective. We know that L-glutamine repairs tissue. Also, L-glutamine supports probiotic activity in the gut, and it is really the food for good bacteria, probiotics, to help multiply within the gut as well. N-acetylcysteine is really support for the liver. If we think about how the liver becomes really compromised, phase 1 and phase 2, detoxification is very much compromised because of oxidative stress, inflammatory issues, lack of nutrients, lack of absorption of nutrients. And so N-acetylcysteine helps raise glutathione stores, which ultimately helps support the liver. Essential fatty acids, again, for gastrointestinal healing. Fiber, for again as a prebiotic, and also to help with the gastrointestinal process of transit within the gut as well. GABA-oryzanol from rice bran oil. This is something that's quite remarkable. A lot of studies have been done in Japan that show its healing capabilities specific to gastro and duodenal ulcers, but also in helping to repair the intestinal tract as well. So the critical therapy, I've given you what I've recommended from now, is the buffered C complex powder. The reason being is it's something in a powder form that can be taken throughout the day and is very easy to access. Vitamin A at 10,000 IUs, and I'll speak more about that in a moment. Vitamin E at 400 IUs. Zinc picolinate, you're looking for 50 milligrams in total, and so I've given you a couple of options because typically people are using a multivitamin as well, and so if you're not going to go over 50 milligrams, you could take our zinc glycinate or biglycinate, very, very highly absorbable at 30 milligrams, or zinc picolinate at 25 milligrams, along with our liquid multi. I recommend the liquid multi simply because it is we also have a child's formula, but it is something that you can play with as far as the dosing is concerned. Again, the adjunct therapies, I've noted some of our glutamines, our N-acetylcysteine, and our ultra omega-3. Apple pectin. I really like apple pectin as a fiber because not only does it work and help with transit time of food, helping with dysbiosis and good bacteria, but it also is very effective at eliminating toxins such as heavy metals from the body. So apple pectin to me is a perfect fiber. And rice bran oil because of the gamma-oryzanol content. So rice bran oil could be the oil that you're using as your cooking oil, as your salad dressing, simply to help with the healing process. Rice bran oil is beautiful. It has the highest smoke point of any oil, so it can be used in very high temperature cooking, but it's also fantastic in salads, a very nice, light, nutty taste. So what is your dietary regime? With leaky gut, the typical recommended diet is the elimination diet. The elimination diet is a 6-week program where you are completely free from eating dairy, wheat, corn, soy, eggs, beef, sugar, processed foods, or any other foods that might be allergenic. If in a perfect world, you're looking at trying to remove most grains, but I know how difficult that is for some people. But keep in mind that antigen slide where I showed there's some, certainly you have a reaction to some foods like gliadin, but it can also be passed on to the antibodies can react to other antigens that are similar. So this is the best rule of thumb, is to try to eliminate most grains if possible. A diet consisting primarily of good quality organic meats, fruits, vegetables, quinoa, chia, nuts and seeds, and flax where tolerated. And rice bran oil is the main source of fat, as I'd mentioned. The supplemental protocol, this is precisely what it is. Again, a 6-week supplemental protocol. Functional medicine treatment strategy that focuses on repairing the intestinal mucosa and correcting leaky gut syndrome. 10,000 IUs of vitamin A, a minimum of 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C. Now this is very, very minimum. When you look at this as a practitioner, you're looking at vitamin C to bowel tolerance. In a health food store environment, it's much more difficult to instruct people at that high a level of vitamin C, because often that can be 10, 20, 30,000 milligrams of vitamin C per day. So to make everyone's life a lot easier, you simply recommend 3,000 milligrams per day, splitting the dose throughout the day as a minimum. And the maximum can be really, quite frankly, to bowel tolerance, where the vitamin C will give them diarrhea. Just to give you an idea of what one would do if they're taking vitamin C and they get diarrhea, then they will note the dosing. If the dosing was 10,000 milligrams in the day and it caused them to get diarrhea, what they would do going forward is reduce that dosing by 25%, and ultimately their recommended dose of vitamin C would be 7,500 milligrams per day. And of course, this is something, if you want to get involved in talking about, you certainly can, but otherwise simply recommend a minimum of 3,000 milligrams per day. Vitamin E is 400 IUs per day, and zinc is 50 milligrams per day. Probiotics, 25 billion, a minimum of 2 times daily. Apple pectin and a multivitamin. I want to speak a little bit about what practitioners recommend. The vitamin A is much higher, and the vitamin E is much higher as well. And it has been very safe and very, very effective. However, in an environment of a retailer, recommending the higher doses of vitamin A and vitamin E might be problematic for you as far as feeling comfortable in doing so. And so I ultimately recommended the 10,000 IUs of vitamin A and the 400 IUs of vitamin E. It will still be very effective. Now on this slide you can see that what I've done is I've given you breakfast, mid-morning, lunch, mid-afternoon, dinner, and bedtime with asterisks in the box, and on the far left-hand corner you're going to see the nutrient. Multivitamin can be twice a day if you want, or even simply once a day, and it's taken with meals. The buffered vitamin C is with meals as well. And anytime you're eating, I would say add a bit of vitamin C to a little bit of water. The buffered vitamin C in the powdered format is what I recommended, simply because it gives you such diversity in how it can be taken and when it can be taken. Vitamin A is taken away from the multivitamin, but it is taken with food, so perhaps maybe recommending at dinner, for example. Vitamin E, again, taken away from the multivitamin, but and taken with food. Zinc, taken away from the multivitamin, and this is, I'm going to speak a little bit about zinc. Specific to your multivitamin, what you're going to do is look at the levels of zinc in your multivitamin that they're taking and subtract the milligrams from the 50 milligrams that's recommended. So typically in a multivitamin you're not getting a lot of zinc, maybe 5 milligrams of zinc, and so you would ensure that that individual would take 45 milligrams of zinc in a capsule form or tablet form if possible. Omega-3 fatty acids, again, always it's always effective in nearly any type of issue, and very much so for healing the gut. Probiotic 10, I've given it 50 billion, and apple pectin. Now, there's some miscellaneous nutrients to consider. Cat's claw, it's an anti-inflammatory, supports the repopulation of intestinal flora, and cat's claw is an herb that is so inexpensive. These particular miscellaneous nutrients could be in addition, or they could be certainly cycled. Any type of sulfur, MSM, for example, it aids in repairing the mucosal lining. It helps to knit the lining back together. Sulfur does this. It's also an anti-inflammatory. Slippery elm works as a protective coating throughout the intestinal wall, and it's an anti-inflammatory. And quercetin as an antioxidant and anti-inflammatory, giving you a number of ways with which it works, enhancing the intestinal barrier functions, and everything from to supporting intestinal inflammation by inhibiting histamine release. So again, slides 30, 31, and 32 are showing you all of your choices that the Now brand has in specifically to helping with my recommendations. Last thing I'll talk to you about today is Now Productology. Now Productology is designed, or has been, it's part of our Now University, and it's designed exclusively for Now retailers. It incorporates 60-minute training sessions on a variety of different topics, and I believe we have 30 to 35 options available to you now. Everything from amino acids to xylitol. These are all free for the retailer, and to register, it's the top URL on the right-hand side. Ultimately, the bottom URL is for ongoing access to these courses. I really encourage you to try these courses. You'll see that they're very informative, extremely usable information, and they're also very timely. 60 minutes out of your day, and you'll learn a lot, and it could be very productive for you with your retail store. Thank you very much for joining me today, and have a wonderful day. Bye now.